YouGov has just released a statistic that we've all been waiting for the last 10 years since Brexit, and that is the then and now comparison between the voters. And for all of you Remainers, including myself, this is a very, very good statistic. YouGov basically have amassed all of their polls together on Brexit and calculated essentially what the vote would be like if it was done today, as whether to rejoin the EU or stay out. And now, for all of you right wingers and Brexiteers that seem to think that Brexit was this absolutely amazing job and decision that the UK made, it's looking pretty unlikely that that is going to stay in place, especially with this statistic. And I'm going to break it all down in this video. Now, obviously, we know that Brexit was an absolutely detrimental decision that we made. You know, businesses having to stop trade with the EU, lots of businesses having to shut, our GDP or losing out on 4% of our GDP, as well as rising our businesses, which led to rising prices through the extra tariffs and checks that all of the trades had to go through between here and France, which is literally 20 miles away, all on the basis of lots of lies from people like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage saying that the £350 million we spend per week on the EU could go into our NHS. We haven't seen any of that. Instead, we saw lots and lots of spending cuts to the NHS and a promise of more secure borders, which obviously was a lie as well, seeing as we're now getting, 50,000 people per year arriving on small boats. So we obviously know Brexit, terrible decision we made. However, some people seem to think it was still an amazing decision. I don't really know what they're using for that. Oh, our sovereignty, great. What law was it exactly that you didn't really like that was being dictated by the EU? Exactly, you can't think of ones because most of them were decent laws that every single country would have, regardless if they were part of an international trading bloc or not. Now, this statistic is obviously something that I'm very, very pleased about because it shows just how much of a landslide that it's been since Brexit has happened, and it shows just where the country is at, showing that the country really knows that Brexit was a bad decision and that we need to be back in the EU. So obviously we know that the original result for Brexit was that there were 16.1 million people who voted to remain, and then there was 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU. That was a 48 to 52% share of the vote. It was a very, very marginal result, unfortunately. And since then, what YouGov has been able to calculate is that obviously over 90% of Remain voters who voted in 2016 would vote to rejoin today. So that's about 16 million people. Because, just under 16 million people. There's been 3 million new voters who have come or who have been obviously granted the ability to vote since Brexit. And they are in favour of rejoining the EU on a 5-to-1 ratio, which means that's an extra, 2.5 million people who would be voting, and 29% of Leave voters also would vote to rejoin the EU. So that is an extra 5 million voters who are on that Leave section who would now vote to rejoin the EU. And also, unfortunately, some people have died who also voted in the 2016 referendum. However, the majority of them are coming from the Leave campaign. So we lose about 3 million votes there. And obviously some would now vote to stay out of the EU. And this all equates to a referendum result, as predicted by YouGov, 19.8 million people voting to rejoin the EU, as opposed to only 11.7 million people voting to stay out of the EU, which is a ginormous shift to the rejoin side of things, and obviously shows that Brexit has been an absolute disaster and that the country wants to remain back or wants to rejoin the EU and get back to how we were. And obviously there's a lot of information to take, but genuinely, this has now been a problem for 10 years and no one's been able to sort out Brexit. And the answer is definitely not, let's just cut all ties with Europe and let's not do anything with them, because that would be even more stupid than the actual Brexit referendum in itself. That is our largest trading bloc. We trade over 40% of our goods to. It's literally 20 miles over the English Channel away, so it doesn't cost that much to export in general as opposed to exporting to, let's say, China, Australia, or the USA. Not that they're bad trading partners, but logistically, the EU is a great market. 500 million people lots of which were in our workforce and have now left, especially those in construction sectors, which are now lacking because of the loss of the EU workers. And it's just been an absolute catastrophe. And finally, we've now got a very, very good, strong prediction that people would want to rejoin the EU if there was a referendum. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means that hopefully someone in the next election, we'll be able to use this as a wild card and say, look, guys, public services, they're failing. Economy, not doing great. Guess what? Let's rejoin the EU. So we have access to all of those workers. So we have access to the market, tariff free. So we have access to all of their health and safety laws, which are a lot better than ours, food standards, and we'll promise to hold a referendum to rejoin the EU. And that could be a genuine wild card at the next election. And I don't know why this isn't being talked about enough. And we need to stop like flushing this down the toilet and saying, guys, Brexit's over. Let's forget about it. Let's just move on with us being sovereign and single. No. If you care about the country and you care about the country doing well economically, what's there to lose in rejoining the EU? It's a benefit for so many reasons as I've just listed out. The party that I think is most likely is going to use that as their wild card will obviously be Labour, seeing as they are quite trailing in the polls by a lot. They really need some sort of good news to boost their image across the country. And I think the promise of a referendum to rejoin the EU, considering the fact that there's predicted to be 20 million people that would vote to rejoin the EU, I think there would be a lot of support behind that and could definitely help them in the next election. But obviously, I'm leaving that out to all the other parties because we know that the Liberal Democrats are very pro EU. They combine that with some other good policies as well. They could push that referendum promise and build on it to try and gain momentum and pressure the current government into even holding a referendum for the next election. But that being said, that statistic is very, very, very promising. Obviously, we've got a lot of time left before anything is probably going to happen with the EU. So a lot more chance of everyone moving over to the rejoin side so we know exactly what's best for our country. And we lose all this stigma about, guys, we're not going to have any of our sovereignty. Well, we really did have a lot of sovereignty. We still kept the pound. We still kept our flag. Don't know what was the problem. That is nearly 20 million votes for rejoining and nearly 12 million votes to stay out of the EU, which just shows how the majority of the country is thinking right now and how that vote would go, showing that Brexit was just an absolute disaster. Of course, guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What do you think would be the outcome if this was to go ahead soon? And whether you think that anyone will actually promise that in their manifestos for the next election. My name's Alex on Politics. I'm independent and authentic, independent from big media brands and all political parties. And I will always speak my mind and what I think rather than taking money from people to say things that I don't actually believe. Make sure to follow my TikTok. We're nearly at 2,000 followers and subscribe to the channel here. We're nearly at 300 subscribers and I will see you in the next video.